local average house prices. Based on that, we could be having to look at delivering 750 houses a year, so about 50% more than we're currently doing. We are having discussions with government over that, because one of the problems we have is that the salaries that you base it on are the salaries of the workers who work within Sedgemoor, not people who live within Sedgemoor and work somewhere else. So if you live in Sedgemoor but work in Bristol and get paid a high salary, that counts towards Bristol's average salary, it doesn't count towards Sedgemoor's. But of course, the fact that people from working in Bristol buy houses in Sedgemoor puts the prices of houses up, so we get this sort of double whammy of the houses are more expensive and the average salary is lower. And that's so we're having that debate with government at the moment, so that's something you need to take into account. And the fact, of course, we've got Hinckley at the moment, which again is putting up the costs of rent and of houses to buy because there's bigger demand. So that is something we're having a discussion with. As it stands at the moment, potentially, if those figures come through and the building continued at the current rate, within 2 years we would be failing the housing delivery test, and that would then mean that a developer could come forward with developments that don't comply with our local plan. It could be outside of the local plan, so it could be bringing forward other sites which haven't been made provision for, on the grounds that they would say, well, you're not delivering the houses on the sites that you said you were going to deliver them on, therefore we'll come forward with this wonderful site somewhere else. We've already seen that starting to happen in Cheddar, in Abington and in North Petherton, where predatory developers are coming forward and saying, well, we can bring forward this site much quicker than your allocated sites. At the moment we can defend that because we are meeting the criteria, but in a couple of years' time, if things don't change, we could start to see those sites getting granted, and we would end up with planning by appeal rather than planning by local plan. In terms of highways, Sedgemoor is looking to work with County at the moment on a thing called the Transport Policy for 2050. Our local plan, as you know, takes us up to about 2032 for housing. But one of the problems is you've got to make plans for where the infrastructure is going to be. There are things like the Bristol Airport development, which will be coming through between now and 2040. That needs to be taken into account, the various buildings of housing and of business. And so we're actually liaising with all these groups at the moment, trying to draw up likely schemes that might well come forward in that time. Certainly one of the big schemes that is being talked about that will be at the front end of that timescale is Junction 22. So that is now actively being spoken to with Highways England as to how that can be dealt with. I actually had a meeting yesterday with representatives from Bristol Airport, because we're saying to them, in effect, when you're planning for your works, you need to bear in mind the impact that you're having on the A38 all the way down to us at Junction 22. And again, getting that message across to North Somerset Council, because they were the ones who will grant the planning permission potentially for the airport. And what we don't want them to do is just think about their boundaries and the fact that once they cross that border, it doesn't matter to them. They need to realise that it's having a knock-on effect to us down the highway. So that's actively being talked about. There's a lot of discussions currently still going on about unitary. I think it would be fair to say the district's view is very much that we are suggesting that it would be better, rather than having a single big unitary, that if county have got problems in delivering some of their services, that perhaps they should devolve them to the districts and allow the districts to take them on. So that would be things like potentially the planning side of county, which deals with minerals and waste applications, but also potentially the highway side of planning, because that is something that's causing a bit of a backlog at the moment, and we think that possibly the districts could help the county out on that front. We've also recently had figures through for Sedgemoor in terms of our planning, and we are still in the top 10 in the country in terms of decision making, in terms of the speed of decision and making it within the time that the government allow us to. And we're at the top in the southwest at the moment, so that is still progressing well. One final thing just to mention, which doesn't directly affect us, but if you haven't already heard, the neighbourhood plan for Burnham and Highbridge has gone through. It went to the executive at Sedgemoor today and they've endorsed it. It will now have to go to full council, and once that is signed off at full council, then that becomes part of the planning documents that Sedgemoor will be working to, and we will have to see what impact that has. The one thing that they didn't do is they didn't allocate any sites in their plan. They left that in effect to Sedgemoor to make the allocations. They've come up with issues relating to the development, particularly of the high streets, looking at design and that sort of side of things. But both there and Cheddar have gone through on their referendums, and that will be interesting to see how they operate. But happy to take any questions.
Yeah, all about the houses and the government insisting on what about all the, like you said, the infrastructure, the dentist and the doctors and the theatres. Nothing seems to be happening in that direction.
I mean, in terms of any development that comes through, you've got this thing called the sort of community infrastructure levy, which is then used to try and provide some of the infrastructure that's required. Some of that can go to highways, some of it can go to particularly education. But in a lot of these cases, you would be looking for developments to bring forward that infrastructure with them. So the Brew Farm developments coming forward on the edge of Highbridge in itself will have to provide its own school, and it will have to provide money towards health service provision of buildings. In terms of actual doctors and dentists, that obviously comes through different funding streams, but that's based on population. So if the people come, the money should come with it. The problem they've got at the moment locally is not the money, it's finding the actual staff to do it. And one of the arguments that's been made with having to provide more affordable housing is that if you've got better affordable housing, then that makes it more attractive for people to come to the area to do those jobs. If they can't afford to buy a house, they can't come down to work. So,
and the kids can't afford to go to university and learn to be doctors.
Yeah.
Malcolm?
Has there been any more progress on the regarding Junction 22 on the motorway?
Only in so much as I say that the Highways England have now are in discussion with both county and district over its redevelopment, and they've accepted that it needs redoing. What they haven't worked out is how. I think the most likely, to be honest, is going to be a lighting scheme will come in there at some point in time.
Oh, sorry?
Lighting.
Just simply lighting.
Yeah. I mean, I think they'll rejig the roundabout as well, but there will be a traffic control system rather like the one down at Bridgewater.
Have to do NDT then.
Right.
Is there a formula when a new housing estate is built, like say 500 houses, for instance? Is there a formula as to how much schooling do they put up?
Yeah.
How much health services do they put in?
Yeah, I mean, certainly
Is there a sort of regulation?
yes, I mean, and in a way, if you have a look online for the site at the end of the road, the county education people there is a formula that you would say the number of houses that you're doing based on the number of bedrooms. They then work out how many children they think would come from that site, and then there's a set sum per child. The suggestion that's been made, I'll comment on the one that's the end of the road because it's all public anyway, but if that happened, they're asking, I think it's about 80 or 90,000 that would go towards education provision.
16,000 a child.
Yeah. So that would go potentially in our situation towards funding another classroom. But on the biggest sites, if you end up with the sort of probably the sites that are 50 to 100, it will be on the same basis at the end of the road. It's how much money. When you get to the big ones like the 500s, like Highbridge, then it tends to be you don't do a lump of money. You build the building and provide the land for it to go on.
What about facilities like shops and pubs?
Shops and pubs generally won't be included. They on a bigger development, say like what's happening in Cheddar, one of the ones there, they've left a piece of land which is for a commercial centre, and that could well be your shops and pub. They did that also with the Stockmore and Millstock down North Petherton Way, and again there they've ended up with some smaller shops, some takeaways and that sort of community area. There was supposed to be a pub on there as well, but that ended up not being able to be commercially let, and it ended up becoming a nursing home. But other than that, they won't specifically allocate, but they will generally on the bigger sites leave a space for them to go on. They're not doing that at Brew Farm because on that one they're trying to put footpath and cycleway links across the river to get people to go into Highbridge rather than create another centre outside.
Thank you.
That's all. Anything else on footpaths, Peter?
Brian told me one about the footpath that goes behind the berries. There's a piece of iron that's stuck up over the ground.
Whether it's iron or wood, I don't know, but it's
I'll go
a trip,
and have a look.
a trip hazard, apparently.
It's by the bridge, is it?
Yeah, the bridge, isn't it?
Which bridge is
So
that?
where is that exactly?
By,
In the berries field.
You know,
Very small.
opposite the tennis court.
I'm not on that.
The fencing again on the path behind the church, I don't know what's happened to that. The post and rail.
Is that what Dave Wellen was going to be doing?
Supposed to be.
Yes, I'm so John's good.
Excuse me.
Do you think there's anything further on the...
No, there's obviously the rear of the church drainage,
Yeah.
which is on there. It's not really referring to it,
No,
We
the,
mentioned it before.
yeah, the post and rail fencing from
Yeah.
the bottom
Yeah.
gate to the top one is gone. And I thought it was on the worksheet, but we need to get that done.
Dave Wellen actually has got a note of it. Unfortunately, it's been quite difficult to get back on a number of other jobs, and I think
That's
the
very
problem
nice
has been
of that.
there were at least two other jobs he hasn't been back on. So I think until he's got those done, it'd be hard to get him to come and work for another job because he needs to
He hasn't done
get
it
himself
behind
up to
us yet.
No.
May I ask Colin something, please? Is that okay? Is that what you're talking about? Because
Yes.
yes, that's it. Because somebody took that photograph and sent it to me to show
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Is Dave Wellen an issue?
Not really. I mean, I just think he's a very busy chap. He's very good at what he does, and he's very, very busy.
good at what he
If
does.
there was anybody else that we could ask to do some of these things, I'm sure we should, but I'm not quite sure who.
Do you know anybody, David?
That's what I was thinking.
Dave does a lot of little jobs.
Yeah.
You know, he does like doing
Can we
contracts.
ask that Dave, if you're prepared, just have a think
Yeah,
outside the meeting and
Yeah,
send an email to Owen with some suggestions?
yeah,
Please.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With regards to Dave Welland, he came to see me today because he has now picked up the sign to go on Coronation Oak up at
It's on you.
Church Road. So it's going to come up, but that has been collected and he's going to do that now.
But we don't want him to do it until we've got this meeting or this presentation organised, do we?
No, well, I do.
I thought he'd been.
Well,
I thought
we
it
have
had
this
been approved.
we have the item on the agenda
We've got
to
a
say
camera on
opening the sign and that sort of thing.
Well, we can't possibly put anything up there at the moment because it's an absolute quilt.
Well, it is a mess, but you can't. All the weeds and everything is a terrible mess. The fence is a wreck, and so it cannot be erected on the fence, and you can go on posts behind it.
On item 8F, we've got Jason Moore extension of contract, which includes that work in front of
But
Gleefield.
at the best bit of the work, you cannot push it on the fence, so it's going to have to go on two wooden
We
posts.
just have to make sure it's stock proof, that's the only thing, because that'd be a perfect.
Well, that won't make any difference to the.
Why can't you
it.
put
So,
why can't we put the fence, put the post this side of the road side of the fence rather than on somebody else's land?
yeah.
Just put it on. There's enough there.
You won't be able to read it if it's by the tree.
Yeah.
We have an
No,
item
we're
on.
putting it.
Well, somebody would get
On
it.
the
That is
road.
it.
That's right.
Yeah.
We need to contact Dave Wellen before we make sure he doesn't do
Well,
anything.
I think he'll be contacting John actually, so.
Well,
Do you want me to deal with Dave Welland and ask him to push it on the roadside?
Can we just wait until we discuss item 8F on the agenda,
Right.
please? Or whatever it is, 8.
Yeah, well, 8A is the Gleefield signage.
So let's
HF is
talk through
Jason
that.
Moor's contract.
Because what we want to do
I
is...
doubt if he's put it up today, but he did take it.
So that's footpaths. Highways, Malcolm, anything?
Nothing to add.
Who did the village green? Anybody?
Sorry, can I just...
It's been reported.
Yeah. Been there
This is as good as mine, you know.
months.
Yeah, well, in fact, I redid it after the last meeting when it came up then, when Hazel was doing the minutes. I mentioned it again to them then, and it was on their list, but not as a main one priority. So So I guess it will be done. You'll probably find that one day it'll just suddenly get done. I suspect.
This year, I
Oh,
think.
well,
Who knows? Bob?
Couple of things. The Station Road hedge, will that come up under something else later?
yes, that will come with the Jason extension contract. You know one?
No, the complaint we had from the person who there was an email
Yeah.
that came out complaining about, and he came and saw you today at
Was that
the,
George King?
Yeah.
Yes, right, yes.
So-
yes.
discussing that. Well, when will that come up?
Well, that'll come under parish surgery, probably.
Okay, happy to leave it until then.
So, yeah.
The other thing was, if I could, under highways, a little while ago, you'll remember I mentioned to you that I was talking to highways about trying to sort out a speed limit on the A38.
Yep.
They've come back to me now and said that they've done all the speed tests. It is in the Goldilocks zone in the sense that the cars are not going so slowly that we don't need a speed limit, and they're not going so fast that they won't take any notice of it. So the county would be prepared to look at a 40-mile limit through there. They've been in touch with the police, and the police have not objected. So the next thing is they would have to go through a traffic order, basically to introduce it. But they've asked me to raise it with the 3 parish councils that are affected, which is basically ourselves, Burnham and East Brent. Because what they're looking at is the possibility of taking the 40-mile limit from the Edithmead roundabout through the Fox and Goose Junction, right the way through to meet up with the 40-mile-an-hour limit that is in East Brent. So that there won't be a change of limit, it'll just run as a 40-mile-an-hour through. What I would ideally like from the parish council would be if you're happy with that, to go ahead, in principle, to let Catherine Tyson at the county council know, because what the county council don't want to do is start the ball rolling, do all the paperwork and start the legal process, only for the parish council potentially say, actually, we've changed our mind, we don't want a speed limit on the A38 anymore.
So the first thing I should say, I would propose that we would support a 40-mile limit
Yeah,
on
I
the
would
A38.
propose that we put it on the agenda next month so that the village have a chance to object if you want to.
Well, when does it have to be in both of?
I mean, I raised it, well, I spoke to Owen beforehand because I said, would it be okay to raise it under highway reports? What this is not doing is committing anything, because there will still have to be the public process of going through and doing the public order.
Right.
What they don't want to do is start all that and then find the parish council themselves are anti it,
Well,
so...
I'm okay, but I mean,
But there will have to be a consultation, it won't just happen, it will still come out through the normal process.
So,
All we're saying is that as a point of principle,
yeah,
we would support it as a council, and there will be an opportunity for public debate subsequently to the process going forward.
I'm happy with that.
Fine by me.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So I think
Okay,
we can support that. Do you want Owen to write to Catherine?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Please, thank you.
all right.
Good.
Just on one minor point, at the last meeting I mentioned the fact that somebody had asked if a white line could be put opposite my house, in front of where the old shop used to be. It's now a dwelling place, because that area is a bit of a no man's land. And I wondered,
I haven't taken that up.
if that could be followed up. Would we have to consult with the house owner? I presume we would. And would it be legal?
What about me on my bike? I wonder about that.
I think we have to go through it.
Comment on that in the sense that following the last meeting, the owners of the house did actually raise it with me and said that that land out the front was their land, and they would certainly want to be talked to before anything was done, because they didn't feel that it was causing a problem as such, and they were obviously they watched the video and heard the discussion, so I think they would want to be spoken to before anything was formally done.
But I don't think we don't have the powers to do it, we'd have to do it through highways.
Police. Is it the police?
I think it would probably be highways, but as I say, as it is their sort of land in front of their house.
So do we need to approach highways, really, to ask the question, and then for them to coordinate that with the owner of the property?
It's up to the parish council how they want to do it, but whether or not you would raise it with the owner, so they at least knew that, because officially they all they know is what they've seen at a meeting on the...
Well then should we write to the owner and just say that we are going to raise it with the county? How do they feel about it?
Well, it's only a white line we're talking about, isn't it?
It was brought up,
What is the problem
asked
now?
for me to raise it by a resident of the village.
Oh, on several occasions during the last 2 or 3 years, we've asked for lines to be put down, and it's always come back, no way, is it possible? It took us forever to get the white line down to the corner of Bonnie's Lane, and then people came and noticed of it.
What number Brent Street are we talking about? Do you know? Do you let me know what number it
It's
is?
109, is it? 111.
We come back from...
I've only lived there for
I've
I've only lived there 31 years.
If you let me know,
I'm sorry, 108 or 110.
if you let me know exactly what the number is.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what-
It'll be an even number.
Right to-
And it's Julie
Next door to the
West.
croft.
Yes, of course.
Julie. No, West.
Yeah.
The name is Julie Weston, I think. Yeah. She works at the school.
Yeah.
Right. Village green and toilet block, who did that this?
I did, Mr Chairman. When I viewed it, the shore bond work was being carried out, so the equipment was out of action, it was all fenced off, and work was being carried out. Grass in general was in good order, may need a cut once all work is completed, and I've just sort of considered it. I wonder whether how Jason's mowers will cope with this new surface. I assume that they will just run over the edge, but whereas before they were obviously butted up against a wooden edging, now there's no edging, but it feathers into the grass. So I think Jason should just be made aware that these surfaces are down, and just to take extra care, because we don't want to damage them.
I'll speak to Jason.
I think it's worth him being made aware of, rather than just ploughing.
Yeah, sure.
The grass was in good order, but it may need cutting, because obviously where the work's been carried out it's probably grown. Litter was okay, and area generally tidy. The only thing is, I think we need to tidy the edge between your patio and the green. It's untidy, and we did talk about it last time, didn't we? What did we decide to do?
The parish gave the parish hall permission to get it levelled down and redone.
Yeah.
That contract has been let, but he just hasn't done it yet.
Oh, I
so
see.
it will be,
Okay.
where the weeds are growing at the moment,
Yeah.
will be redone.
It just looked a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Car park needed sweeping, lots of apples on the ground. I did ask for it to be put on the thing, but it's not on. But I wonder whether we should consider taking that apple tree down, because it does provide a nuisance and a mess. And I noticed that the kids have been throwing rotten apples up against the wall of the toilet block, if you notice. And if we're going to refurbish the toilet block, which is not on the agenda, we need to look at it. There are weeds near the rear of the toilet block which needs doing with, and I think we could do more to tidy the area. Who's responsible for cutting the grass outside the toilet block? Is that Jason? It always seems left and untidy to me, but anyway, I think it needs cutting. The toilet block, the ladies' main door needs easing, it doesn't close properly. And in general, tidy, but needs updating, which we all know, and refurbishment. Otherwise, it's, if you like, adequate. And again, I make note of the apples that have been thrown up against the toilet block. Doesn't really help with the image that we want to portray as something responsible for. So that's my
The
report.
land on that fence on the far side, between the footpath and the chain link fence, is getting very bad again, I've noticed.
I didn't notice it was bad.
And there was
not as bad as it normally
there
was.
were brambles at face height on the corner where the chain link fence was, and I saw Jason, because he was cutting it on our neighbour's garden. I said, could you make sure you cut it, because it was at the brambles were at face, it was coming from a tree on the corner.
I didn't
I think
notice
he's cut it. I
Mr.
think he would have
Chairman,
cut it. He would have cut it, Colin, before you did it, because he said I would do it, so I'm going to go and cut the lawn.
Who's the next one?
David, thank you.
Cheers.
GB Sports, well, we had a report, and I think it was...
There's a lot of fencing on the green.
Mm.
It says a lot of fencing is on the green.
Yeah, it could be.
It was the unfortunate timing of the inspection, wasn't it? I mean, his point that he made, John addressed with Shawbond and...
Well, I kept the parish council informed
Yeah.
of what's going on.
But no, you sent an email of that report to him to say that the gates were not shut and that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
and
And he's dealt with it, so
he's
it's
responded to it.
Yeah, so that,
It's
there
under
are no
control.
issues. Now, the only thing that I was told was that a child had a fall before the work started
Yes.
and ended up with a fractured arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a bit sad because evidently I think it was it Jen Keel's wife who looked after him? Or-
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was like 3 hours before an ambulance turned
Yeah.
up. But the question I ask is, where was the mother or the parents?
Well, he was up on the monkey trial, and unfortunately, children will go up on there. And I suppose in these modern times they've got to be supervised by somebody somewhere.
But there was nobody in supervision, that's the
I
thing.
have no idea.
How old was he?
But
We've had nothing officially from the...
I just want...
We heard nothing.
11, was he? Was he about 11?
I only heard about it
I
today.
heard there had been 2 accidents on there.
Really?
From Jed told me this morning.
Really?
I don't know who the other one was. He didn't
Hang
know.
on. There's an issue here. If there are accidents, they should be recorded
They should
and
be
monitored.
reported on board.
We cannot say, I heard there was. There should be a process.
Something we look
If you hear of an accident, I think it should be reported to Owen, so it's monitored.
Well, I only heard about it this morning.
I only heard this afternoon.
It's absolutely critical that
Yeah.
we are aware,
Mm.
because that is our area.
Mm.
And if I were to have heard there may have been an accident, I would have said to Owen so that at least it was recorded, and if anything came through, at least we were aware of it, or we could ask for further information.
Do we know where it was?
When? Well, the one that was broken arm was the day when there was an awful accident down at Taunton.
That's right, because all the ambulances were on the
Because
yeah.
That's why it took 3 hours.
Rosemary was in fact about 14 cars back from the actual accident and stuck there for 3 or 4 hours.
And I had a phone call to say that could I access the green because the ambulance needed to get on the green. I said I didn't have a key, and I thought Colin had a key, and I gave Jed Colin's phone number.
Who has got keys to that?
I really don't.
The lock was changed.
We should know.
So why
Should
don't we have a coded lock?
Mm.
When we changed the lock on the gate, I'm not sure what happened with the keys, because we've got sort of 2 lots of keys, haven't we?
Matt's got one, isn't
I have one bunch of keys, but I understood the lock was changed on the gate to the village.
Wasn't it
So
so
it
that
became
Western
power.
Power?
I mean, normally I've got a key, which at the moment
Which
John has
is being
got.
done. David's got it at the moment.
Okay. But the Western Power, basically, they've got a copy of that key, which is in that little box, which is under a combination that they have access to, so that's where they can then open it
Where's the box?
On the gate.
on the gate.
So they can get to the...
But that's just for them to use.
And Jason has a key.
Yes.
Yes.
On the question of accidents, I think it might be an idea for you to ring Jed Keel, who'll give you the details.
Well, I
What
don't
happened to
know.
him.
We should find out what we're liable to do, what
Yeah.
we need to do. I don't know who does.
Yeah, I mean, what should happen really is if anybody has an accident on the green, they should report it to the council.
Yeah, but following on from that, if all the accidents were on a particular piece of equipment, then we'd need to look at the equipment. So it one feeds into the other. We've got statistics to show how safe our play area is, and also to identify some of the more hazardous equipment which
Well,
people need to be made.
that's why we have a report every month.
But it might be more difficult equipment that children love to play on, and therefore it's more likely to happen. Is that the right word?
Now the real point is that we haven't got a formal reporting mechanism and recording mechanism, isn't it?
You need to know what we're liable to do, what we have to do.
Well, we have a liability under common law as the landowner, and it's our equipment, I suspect.
We should be
Well,
keeping records of
that's
any
why we have to bring
reports.
inspectors once a month.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. Colin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can I ask that Owen consults with SALC
That's
to
right.
see what our...
Well, actually, more importantly, the insurance company.
Yes.
Well,
Exactly.
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
It's both, to see exactly what, rather than guessing.
Yeah, what we should
Just
do.
see what we are responsible for and what our obligations are.
Okay, fine, we'll do that. And if anybody hears about the accidents, or gets any information about the accident,
I'll find out tomorrow.
Let you know.
We haven't had any rain, so I don't suppose there's anything on flood mitigation, Peter.
No,
Oh, I want to. I'd like to put some of the equipment that we have stored in the trailer in the toilet block, because the trailer is outside at Copsall, and I don't think it should be. The trailer's got to stay outside now because of what they're doing there, but I think that the equipment inside would neatly fit in the toilet block with the other. That's all right with everyone.
Well, as long as you can get it in there.
Yeah, it's only some traffic cones and some lay flat pipe. It won't take any space.
Yeah, it's easy to get out
Yeah.
if they refurbish the stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So parish surgery
now
and... Sorry.
before we move on, there is in fact a box of torches and batteries in there. I don't know how long batteries last. You know.
Maybe we ought to sort through some.
Not very long, I would have thought.
But I wouldn't have thought so.
No.
Maybe I'll pull them out and see what they look like.
If you would, Peter. Kindly, thank you. So, surgery.
surgery, we had, well, two visitors, Kim Wilcox came, and also George King from Station Road. His concern that were raised was the speeding issue in Station Road. He feels that the speed indicator device should be occasionally put on in that area of the village, because at the moment he has a problem with speeding vehicles. He has trouble getting out of his, he's got four houses or 5 houses there, and he has difficulty with the display there sometimes. He can't always see the traffic. He says some of the speed, some of the traffic drives him into is horrendous. So he's asking why we can't have the speed indicator device in Station Road as part of our schedule.
We can ask permission to...
Well, we've actually got I thought we sorted out a location and we've got the clamps. I think we'd agree with that on Station Road.
I think there is one on display in South Brent Close. I'm sure I've seen this sit down there.
So I think we've got an agreed location. So the issue more, and it will come up later, is the adequacy of the sit.
Yeah, okay, right, okay.
Can I just ask then, when does it come into use, the seat? When does it actually trigger it? Not till 30?
No, about 27 miles an hour.
Because it's never come on when I go fast, ever, when it's down
I've
there.
done that street this last couple of days.
Should increase
What?
It's too quick.
No,
Slow.
I have to say it was quite
When it,
accurate.
when
It
it,
came on for me, what, 29?
Yeah,
Oh, it didn't
29
for me.
when it,
Not
when it,
at
work,
all.
27 if I'm right.
About 10 times.
when it works correctly, even if it doesn't flash, it actually records the speed.
It does the speed, yeah.
It
Yeah,
records the speed.
Right.
But because we haven't
I think
had,
it's better if it does record,
We'll have to
show
talk
what you're doing actually.
yeah, but we
personally.
haven't had any data download for over a year.
Oh,
So we don't know what it's doing, whether it's even accurate. And since it had its decided to do its lap of honour in the swimming pool, or got rained on, we have a question mark. But it is on the agenda later on.
Oh, right, sorry, I didn't realise that.
The other thing there was what Bob raised earlier on about the hedge issue. Because that in a sense is part and parcel of the same issue, isn't it?
Yes.
they can't get access out of that development because there are problems with the hedge. And was it left or right? I mean, which wasn't. And in fact, we did write to him about a year ago, George himself, asking if he could actually deal with his hedge.
Yeah.
And he came back and said that the county, he passed it on to the county. But I don't know what's happened to
No.
research.
that's not George.
So it's just a question of deciding who the owners are of this hedge, I suppose, and making sure that we write to them as we did before.
Chairman, I was only going to suggest it might be worth, there are, as you said, there's like 4 or 5 properties that sit behind it. If we drop them all a note saying, could they get that hedge sorted? Because as you say, it is the access visibility, but it's also the pavement, because that gets so narrow, people can't get past that. So
I've got details from last time.
Anything, I guess there's nothing on police matters at that time. Receive a report from the clerk.
Well, there's nothing to say other than notice board, the replacement notice board going on the parish hall should be done next week. And then we can have the old one removed. Because it's a bit of a liability, as Roger has found recently, it's very hard to use that notice board here. So we'll need to get the old one.
Is it stationed where? No?
It's going to be stationed on the parish hall. I'm not sure exactly what you agree with.
On the left.
basically the front left-hand corner,
Right, okay, there's
facing,
Facing the path down the side.
no, facing the front.
Yeah.
So, and that'll have Brent Knoll Parish Council on there, engraved on the actual board.
Just Jenny, that you're aware of the caravan in front.
I'll let you raise that with us.
So, once I've got that, then I'll obviously make sure Roger has a key. And
Yes, please.
So, that should improve things tremendously.
Correspondence?
Correspondence, there's a CPRE invitation to an affordable housing event, which I think is on 20th of October. It's the AGM, affordable housing for Somerset countryside. I mean, whether anybody wishes to attend that, it's a matter for you really. We get that every year, that invite. And the other one is a Royal Mail scan mail flyer. Sending us a scan mail.
You want to put that in the post box?
Sorry? Yes.
Good idea.
Yeah, could do, yeah.
I've received spam messages frequently.
By mail or phone?
By phone.
Oh, this is by...
Yeah, but it's relevant to that. I phoned BT, if you're with BT that is. I phoned BT and they said, put the phone down, which I did. Then dial 1572 and they'll ask you your details and that will be directed next time they call into a junk mailbox.
That's if you've got a BT line.
Yes.
Only if you've got a BT
Yes.
line. And they don't ask you details. All it says is, do you wish the last number? Do you want the last number put in your junk email?
Yes.
But have you signed up to the telephone preference service?
Yes. But it misses.
John?
Yeah, I've got BT, and in the last couple of weeks or so ago, I had at least three emails. They were all the same, and one was somewhat suspicious because at the bottom I had to update all the information on my account. And it was clearly a BT letter, a complete copy. Did have a word with BT, and I sent it to BT Fishing because if you're not concentrating, put work everything in there, and whether they're coming from Burma or not, I don't know. But the fishing mail from BT is about something.
Yeah, I had one.
But they should be passed on to BT.
I did,
to
I put
fishing.
it straight through, yeah.
On this same point, funny enough, a friend of mine last night told me that he had his current account emptied. This last week or so, while he was away on holiday. Somebody had cloned his card. So it does happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of getting divorced.
Finance.
Finance, basically, we've got...
I just suddenly saw the date of the next coastal cluster. Is that? Have you got that there?
I have got it. Do you mind if I forwarded it on to you? Didn't I?
Yeah,
Can I forward it on to you again? I've got the stuff.
I think I've got it.
Yeah,
I
I'll
just
forward it on
want
to
to
you.
make sure I do it. Have
I'll
you got
forward
it,
it on
Bob? Is it? It's next week, isn't it?
The 9th.
The 9th.
Tuesday the 9th.
Tuesday. Thank you.
Put it on the agenda next time.
Sorry. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, statutory repayments are, as usual, with one addition this month of Sedgemoor District Council's contract payment for the toilet block and the docking removal, or not removal, emptying I should say.
Can you take over the chairing for a second, Colin, because I've got a variable payment and I have to leave the room.
Yeah.
That's my septic. Oh, I need to stand up. The knees are going. I should go for a walk on the new play surface.
We won't be very long. Richard, the first item was £8.18 for postage for the paperwork sent from the last meeting, sent back to me. So that's basically what it is. So can I have your agreement to make that payment?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you.
The only other accounts, we've got Hazel Brinton's local fees for the last meeting, £57.51. Eon Energy account 33 to 35. There's an inland revenue element. Remember I mentioned to you some meeting ago about the fact that national insurance hadn't been paid by employer national insurance, even though I don't pay it because I'm over the age of paying it, the council still have to. And we've racked up a £94.20 outstanding account from last year, which I now need to pay to them. And then the Clerk's expenses and allowance for July-September, which is much reduced because obviously didn't have the travelling costs from Taunton to meetings. So it's about £220 last year, so it's down around £60. So they're the main payments there. Just one other thing, on the Eon Energy, we've now had a new contract for the new year, and it remains the same, actually, remarkably. If we don't agree to go ahead on it, then it goes on to variable payments, which cost another £100 a year. So I need your permission just to agree to go ahead with it. And also, finally, well, if we do the payments first of all, and just have that approved first of all. Okay, is that okay? And then the only other thing then was the audit, which is now finally passed muster after a long struggle to get them the information they required. So that's now done and dusted.
Can I presume that actually never found anything to comment on?
After having asked for about 7 or 8 pieces of additional information. So, you know. So that one's dealt with. So that's all finance.
Good. So matters for consideration. And the first one is Glebe signage. Now, I think we have to think in terms of that alongside Jason's Mayo contract because of the state of the land where we wish to put this sign, I think.
So do you want to take Jason Mayo, you can take Jason Mayo contract one first?
Probably, that's the best way forward.
Jason Mayo's quoted for South Brent Close, Station Road, Cedar Close Triangle and Church Lane, Leafield area. Quoted £270 for the remaining part of this year, and then obviously we'll add to the contract next year.
Where does it run from to?
Up to March.
I propose we accept it. Any
So it was very reasonable.
Yeah.
So the question we then ask is, can you speak to Jason to get that area
Can do
sorted
that.
out quick?
Deal with that.
That's a priority,
Yeah.
please.
And sorry, Mr. Chairman, once he's sorted the grass out by in Church Lane, can we on 8A agree that the posts for the sign go on the this side of the fence rather than in
I don't want it in the road.
No.
I agree with you,
Some
Colin.
nice-
Totally.
Anybody,
Certainly,
anybody object to that?
Yeah, opposite the oak tree, yeah. Like,
We can go
very,
ahead
very
and
much
have
like, sorry?
we can go ahead and have that done. And then we can arrange an opening or an unveiling or whatever that day.
Who's going to do it? Who's going to do it?
What, the post?
Well,
David Welland is.
Well, David, well, yes, I spoke to David Welland today. He will do it. I will contact him to say it's going to be the outside of the fencing. The cost will be a little extra because he needs to get a couple of upright posts and things like that. Basically, that's what he's got to do it, so basically tell him to get on with it.
Yeah.
So it's just a question of positioning the posts, and I will talk to him about it.
But can you ask him how far until Jason's tidied the area?
Well, why?
Oh,
Because he'll have to cut it when the posts are in position anyway. They can make
There's an awful lot of clearance.
It's a mess.
It is
I will
a
talk
real
to Dave.
mess.
I'll talk to Dave. Well,
So we've agreed that, so taking George's point that you made so eloquently first before the meeting, if we have a formal opening, we can, it's probably best to make sure we've got the thing up and ready before we then agree to ask for the school to be present.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to think, because Dave Welling's got a lot of work on, he's now taking it away, and I would imagine it'll be up in a week.
Right. Now George's point about putting it in the magazine, or
Slight problem potentially in that obviously, I mean, the October mag is out already. So the next one is the November one. So we can certainly put something in for the November one, but if you're talking about an early November unveiling, then it's going to be a bit tight. But
We've got other unveilings, we've got unveiling at the
Yes.
churchyard, unveiling at the village hall. That's Legion stuff.
I don't want to have any unveilings.
Well, I guess the best thing is to make sure we get this in place first.
Yeah.
isn't it? Is that the first thing to do, and then hopefully that will be done next week or so. We might just be able to put something in the BK and hopefully.
when is your last date for? 15th. 15th of October, for November. So if we aimed it for the first week in November,
I think we need to do it fairly early, because let's say we've got the unveiling at the hall of a plaque, and then Remembrance Sunday, there's another unveiling up at the churchyard, with plaques there.
but if we want a guest to go and do it, that's all. Gino Owen's going to hopefully be available to come up and go up there. So we need to agree a time and a time during the day for the children. So I suspect it will be late, sort of mid-morning.
Yeah, children will be involved.
So, first thing is sign up, area tidied, and target a date of first week in November.
If they start their half-term October, how long will that be for?
The parents say too long, and we say not long enough. The children say not long
So we
enough.
have to make sure it's after their half-term.
Yeah, 25th starts the 25th,
So 25th, I would guess.
which is a Thursday.
They would usually go back on the day of the carnival.
Yeah, November the 5th, most of it. Yeah.
When's our parish council date? The 7th.
Yeah.
We could have to do it on the afternoon of the 7th. And the council could join in.
Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah,
So can we target the 7th of November? Can you
Remember,
contact Gina?
Yeah, I'm welcome to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And of course,
School dress.
Yeah.
Principal school.
Just Plymouth.
Moving on, grade 2 chest tomb restoration. Now again, George has set out the issue, and I think one of the reasons for why he would like our involvement, or to act as a lead involvement, is so that we would be able to reclaim any VAT and save 20% of the potential costs. George has done a lot of homework on potential fund organisations or funding organisations, and is even prepared to make a contribution through his historical society, etc. I personally feel that it's a historic item in the village, it's a go-to village, and as a village, should we not be content to ensure that those are preserved going forward? So I would support the thing in principle, but I don't know what others feel.
Well, we don't know, at the moment, we don't really know how much.
Yes, we do. He's told us 1,700.
No, I know, yes, but how much would our contribution be? We don't know how much anybody else will come up with.
Well, just to go back to square one again, if the parish council are going to finance this in order to make savings, then they will have to make grant applications in the name of Brent Knoll Parish Council to all the parties concerned.
Yes.
So that means someone on the parish council will have to work with George to complete the applications and to get them all in and to coordinate them. What we'll need is a rough budget of what we're going to apply to each particular body for. For instance, these people, St Andrew's Church in Dorset, the Nuttall Trust, the PCC, Brent Knoll Parish Council themselves maybe. It all needs to be packaged so we know what we're doing. So somebody needs to work with George and complete the application forms.
But the first, can we have agreement then, or are we saying that, are you content that we as a parish council go forward leading the project rather than, because if we're going to start filling the application forms on behalf of the parish council, we need that agreement, that's all.
I propose that Colin takes it on, he knows what he's doing, and that we take our lead from him, and at a later date, although we support it in principle, we decide as to whether we want to go ahead with it or not, as to the outcome of the joining up with the grant people.
Yeah. I mean, George has come to my house on a couple of occasions and we've been through the thing in broad terms, not in detail. And it's my understanding that the grant organisation, the church one, would fund 50% of the cost. But they would need evidence that there is some support from the PC, not the PC, the PCC.
Not the trust.
That procure, because it's on church ground, they would need it from the procure church.
And then can we write to the PCC, and if they agree to join us, then we go ahead, but if they don't, then we opt out.
Well, tacit discussions have been held between George and Jed Keel as a representative friend of the church.
All I'd say
And
is,
subject to that, and subject to what we say tonight, he would be raising it with the PCC.
as far as the PCC is concerned, and as far as Jed is concerned, I do know that the church is catching up on the fact, the PCC is catching up on the fact that they've got to attend to the quinquennial survey, which was done 3 or 4 years ago. And nothing has been done because there's been a moratorium on funds and spending any money anywhere. And one of the things I know that they are considering is dealing with the north side of the nave roof, the north aisle roof and the tower roof. I got terrifically involved in that because I did it once before, but I do know that they were going to have to look probably in the region 110,000, 120,000 pounds for that lot, of which they will have by way of grant from the Friends account, probably looking at about 20,000, 25,000 quid. I spoke to Joe about it. He said, well, that's all right, we've got some money in the account. They haven't got that much money in the account, so I cannot predict how much money there will be in the Friends account.
Colin?
Bob was
Chairman, I was only going to say, rather like you in principle, I don't see it. I'm not unhappy with supporting this. I think in a way it would almost be that we would support it subject to the rest of the money being found. And as long as we know that it's not above a certain amount that we agree to maybe contribute.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
As long as it's not above that, then it doesn't affect us because the money's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
As it stands, my rough calculations is I think the VAT that we would be saving would be about 350 quid. And I don't know whether this is right at this stage or maybe not, but I would be happy to propose that we would put in a maximum of 150, which would then bring it to 500 total. I don't think we could not put anything in because we are simply seen as a tool of getting around the VAT. It would not allowed. So we have to put some money into the pot if we're going to do it. But I'd be happy to propose that if that's any help.
Colin?
well, there's a proposal there, so I can't say anything because Bob has made a proposal. Well, okay, then mine's not a proposal, but I would suggest that I meet with George and we will make a list of all the parties that are going to be approached, and we pencil in what we think would be suitable sums to ask them for to make up the balance, assuming that we're going to get half. And then we know exactly where we are. I can report back and say, well, look, this is what we need to go for, and this is what we could do, and therefore can we go ahead and make grant applications. If we start it now, we'll be in time.
I still maintain that we should have the PCC should join in on this, because it's seen, even if it's £50 per hour or £100. If they can find £110,000 for a roof, then I'm sure £100 would.
Yeah, well that's what Colin's just said. He said
That's what I'm suggesting.
I wasn't listening, I'm sorry. Too intense.
So can I have a show of hands if we accept Colin's kind suggestion? Thank you. And we'll
George, you're on the ropes now.
issues relating to sewage overflow.
No issues apparently.
Well, we had a letter from the drainage board, and that was the answer. And I think that was perhaps a kite that was flown
As part of the
anti.
yeah.
Notice board replacement. Well, you've had confirmation that's down. Decisions for the toilet block. So it was on the agenda, Colin.
It is, yeah, I must admit, it's nearly the end of the line, but, and I apologise for that. I've gone out to 4 people for quotes, and I've asked them to be in by the 17th of October.
Right.
I've had 1 quote, which I'm not going to divulge to you. It's I'm prepared to put them all together and say this is where we are. But at least we've got 1 price in. So
can I just ask, is it, and you don't have to declare it, but is it a price that is likely to be not to prevent the thing going forward? Is it put the ball in the court that say no way we're going to do this?
I'm not sure, because it depends how we're going to finance it. If we're going to finance it the way we're financing the refurbishment of the village green, which I think probably it should be, then I see no reason.
Good. Okay, thank you. And obviously we've got, is it next?
Politicians answer, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's not like